Imagine 5 young men, full of life, vanishing without a trace after a basketball game in a quiet California town. Days later, their car is found stranded in the middle of the snowy wilderness, miles away from where they should have been. Doors unlocked. Windows down. Keys gone. But no sign of the boys. Weeks pass. And then, one by one, their frozen bodies begin to appear, some scattered in the woods, others curled up in agony, their shoes missing, their feet frostbitten. One man was found starved to death, inside a cabin stocked with food and matches. No one was chasing them. There were no signs of foul play. So why did they run? Why did they die? And why does this bizarre American case mirror one of the strangest unsolved mysteries in Russian history, where 9 seasoned hikers in 1959 fled their tents barefoot into a snowstorm, only to be found dead in horrifying and inexplicable ways? Welcome to the chilling connection between the Dyatlov Pass incident and the Yuba County Five, 2 cases, 2 countries, 2 decades apart, but bound by the same haunting question: what scared them to death? It began like any other quiet evening in Yuba City, California. February 24, 1978. The streets were calm, the town wrapped in its usual sleepy stillness. There was nothing in the air to hint at the strange events that were about to unfold, no sign that 5 young men would soon vanish into the cold darkness, leaving behind a mystery that would haunt their families, the media, and investigators for decades. These weren't reckless teenagers or troubled runaways. They were ordinary men. Kind, gentle, and well-loved in their community. Bill Sterling, age 29. Jack Hewitt, 24. Ted Weiher, 32. Jack Madruga, 30. And Gary Mathias, 25. All 5 had mild intellectual disabilities or psychiatric conditions. They were sometimes referred to as the boys by their families, despite being adults. Their days revolved around routines, families, and shared interests. One of their biggest joys was basketball. They played together on a local team for people with disabilities called the Gateway Gators. That weekend, they were buzzing with excitement. They had a big game the next day in Sacramento, a Special Olympics qualifying tournament they had trained hard for. The winner would get a week-long trip to Los Angeles. It meant everything to them. So, on the night of February 24th, the 5 friends piled into Madruga's 1969 Mercury Montego and drove 50 miles north to Chico to attend a college basketball game. They watched UC Davis beat Chico State, left the stadium in high spirits, and then, they were never seen alive again. When none of the boys returned home that night, their families grew concerned. But concern quickly turned to panic as the hours stretched into days. These were men who lived structured lives, who didn't wander. They would never miss their big game, not by choice. Something had gone wrong. Search efforts began immediately. Days passed. Then, for days after they vanished, police found the Montego. The discovery only deepened the mystery. It was located on a remote mountain road near Oroville, east of the Plumas National Forest. The car sat oddly on the snow-covered dirt path, more than 70 miles from Chico and far off any logical route home. The terrain was rough, steep, and unfamiliar to the boys. Jack Madruga, fiercely protective of his car, would never have taken it up such a treacherous road, especially not at night. The car itself was in working condition. It had enough gas to continue driving. The keys were missing, but the doors were unlocked. The windows were rolled down. Strangely, it seemed like no effort had been made to get the car unstuck, though it wasn't badly lodged in the snow. No footprints led away from the vehicle. No notes were left behind. The scene felt frozen in time. As if they had simply stepped out and vanished. It didn't make sense. Why had they come up this road at all? What had lured them so far into the mountains? And where were they now? Their families were devastated, unable to make sense of the discovery. Each boy had his own routines, his own fears, and his own limits. For them to willingly travel into such a cold and remote area, away from streetlights and safety, seemed impossible. Especially when they had been looking forward to the basketball tournament the next morning. Something must have gone terribly wrong. But what? Search teams combed the snowy woods for weeks, helicopters circled the mountains, and volunteers on foot risked the elements. But for months, there was nothing. No sightings. No bodies. Just silence. A hollow void, as if the mountains had swallowed them whole. Then spring came, and with the thaw, the mountains began to give up their secrets. On June 4th, a group of motorcyclists riding through the area stumbled upon a deserted U.S. Forest Service trailer in a remote part of the woods, nearly 20 miles from where the car had been found. Inside, they found a nightmare. The body of Ted Weiher was sprawled on a bed in the trailer, wrapped tightly in 8 sheets, almost like a mummy. His feet were frostbitten, severely gangrenous, and his face was emaciated. Investigators would later estimate that Ted had survived for nearly 3 months in that trailer before finally succumbing to starvation and exposure. The trailer had been stocked with supplies, canned food, matches, clothing, and fuel. But none of it had been used. The boys had somehow broken into the trailer but failed to take full advantage of its resources. It was as if they were too scared, or too confused, to help themselves. Outside the trailer, the bodies of Bill Sterling and Jack Madruga were found in the woods, miles apart. One had been partially eaten by animals. Their remains were so far from the car and the trailer that no one could understand how they had reached such distances, especially through snow without proper gear. Days later, Jack Hewitt's backbone was found near the same area. Only one of the 5 was never found, Gary Mathias. To this day, his fate remains unknown. The Yuba County 5 case was declared an accidental tragedy by authorities. But nothing about it felt accidental. Every discovery raised more questions than it answered. Why did they leave the car? Why did they separate? Why did Ted starve next to edible food? And what happened to Gary? The case chilled the public, but there was something even more unsettling about it, something hauntingly familiar. Because nearly 2 decades earlier, on the other side of the world, another group of young people fled into the snow in similar, terrifying fashion, and never came back. The Mercury Montego sat like a ghost on the snow-packed road, silent and strange, as if frozen in time along with the mystery it carried. Search teams who first approached it couldn't help but pause. It wasn't just the oddity of its location, it was the unnatural stillness surrounding it, as if whatever had happened here left an imprint on the air. The road wasn't a place you ended up by mistake. It wasn't even a shortcut. In fact, it was barely a road at all, narrow, unpaved, winding deep into the Sierra Nevada wilderness. It was the kind of place only rangers, hunters, or locals with a reason would ever find themselves. The car was intact. No signs of collision or vandalism. Tires weren't slashed. The engine could still start. Investigators found the doors unlocked and the windows slightly rolled down. The keys were missing. The boys had clearly exited the car willingly. But willingly doesn't mean calmly. What baffled investigators the most was what didn't happen. There were no signs the men had tried to dig out the car. No attempts to free it from the shallow patch of snow it had rested on. They could have easily gotten it moving. But instead, they left it and walked away. Who abandons a warm car, with a full tank of gas, in sub-freezing temperatures, to walk into a frozen forest at night? The more police looked, the more questions emerged. On the passenger seat, they found folded maps of California. On the floor, candy wrappers from snacks the men had bought in Chico just hours earlier. In the glove box, a program from the basketball game they had attended. All reminders of how normal their evening had started. But now, everything about their behavior defied logic. The terrain they had entered was brutal, steep ridges, thick forests, and sharp temperature drops. The snow was nearly 6 feet deep in places. None of the men were dressed for the elements. They wore light jackets, tennis shoes, slacks. No gloves. No heavy coats. Not even boots. In the middle of a harsh Sierra Nevada winter, they were dressed as if they were out for a casual walk in town. And then there was the question no one could answer: why had they driven up here in the first place? To understand just how far off course they were, you had to trace the route from Chico to Yuba City. It was straightforward, south, along Highway 70. The route they took, or ended up on, made no geographic sense. They'd driven northeast, far into the mountains, away from all logic, away from safety, and into nowhere. Locals speculated that maybe they had taken a wrong turn. But those who knew Jack Madruga, the driver, disagreed. He hated the cold. He didn't like camping, or the outdoors. He was protective of his car and careful about where he drove. He wouldn't have ventured up a road like that willingly, not with snow on the ground, and not at night. Gary Mathias, the one who remained missing, was the only one with military experience. He had spent time stationed in Germany and was considered street smart. But he also had a history of schizophrenia and had gone off his medication before. Some believed he might have had an episode, and the others followed him in confusion or panic. But there was no evidence of that either. No signs of struggle, no argument, no crash. Only silence, and snow, and abandonment. In the early days of the investigation, theories ran wild. Maybe the boys had witnessed something they shouldn't have. Maybe they were chased. One witness claimed he saw a woman and a baby near a car on the same mountain road that night, which prompted some speculation that the men had tried to help someone in distress. Others suggested foul play, but no signs of violence were found near the vehicle. As the hours turned into days and then into weeks, families grew desperate. Flyers were posted. Interviews were given. Yet not a single new clue emerged. Until the spring thaw. Months later, when the snow melted enough to allow further searching, the bodies were discovered. The state of their remains only deepened the mystery. One body found 11 miles from the car. Another, 8 miles away. All spread out in different directions. The distances were staggering. In snow that deep, wearing thin shoes and without supplies, they shouldn't have made it that far. And yet they had. Something had driven them to walk deeper into the forest instead of returning to the car. Something irrational, something unnatural. And then, the discovery of the trailer. Inside was Ted Weiher, wrapped in blankets, his beard grown thick, his body wasted away. On the shelves, untouched cans of food. A working heating system. Matches. Everything needed to survive. All unused. His cause of death, starvation and exposure. He had survived for months before dying alone in the cold. A man dies slowly in a trailer full of food. Another is found frozen on a path miles away, shoeless. A third's bones lie scattered in the brush, as if he had crawled until his last breath. And the fifth man, vanished without a trace. The story was unsettling enough. But across the globe, in a cold Russian wilderness nearly 20 years earlier, another group of people had fled into the snow. They, too, left safety behind. They, too, ran without shoes. And they, too, died horribly, without explanation. It was called the Dyatlov Pass incident. And soon, people began to notice the parallels. 9 hikers entered the Ural Mountains in February of 1959. All were young, experienced, and familiar with the wilderness. Their goal was to reach Otorten, a peak whose name, in the local Montsi language, ominously translates to "Don't go there." The journey started as planned, with optimism and photographs capturing their smiles. But none of them would return alive. When Soviet search teams finally discovered the scene weeks later, what they found confounded even the most seasoned investigators. Their tent was slashed open, from the inside. Whatever had caused their terror made them cut their way out rather than use the entrance. The footprints left in the snow told a story that no one could make sense of. Some were barefoot. Some wore only socks. Others had a single shoe. And all of them had fled into the frozen night without jackets, without gloves, into temperatures that would kill in minutes. It was panic, pure and directionless. Their bodies were found in a bizarre spread, some near the edge of a forest, others deeper in, and the final 2 buried under several feet of snow in a ravine. The nature of their injuries raised more questions than they answered. One woman was missing her tongue and eyes. Others had skull fractures and broken ribs, yet no external bruises, as if they had been hit by immense force from the inside. These weren't injuries one could get from a simple fall or avalanche. These were violent, devastating traumas. The official cause? Hypothermia and exposure. But what could drive a group of rational, experienced hikers to tear out of their own tent half-dressed into lethal cold and keep running, one by one, until none were left alive? Theories flooded in. Avalanche was one. But there was no sign of one. Their tent was still partially standing, and their gear was untouched. Some blamed infrasound, a low-frequency sound caused by wind patterns that could induce panic in the human brain. Others suggested military experiments, secret weapons tests, or radiation. Strangely, some of the bodies did show signs of radiation exposure. No conclusive explanation was ever confirmed. The Soviet government closed the case quickly. They attributed the deaths to a compelling natural force. And then they sealed the records. For decades, the Dyatlov Pass incident lived on in whispers, in classified files, and in conspiracy circles. But it was never just the horror of the event that captured imaginations, it was the silence. The emptiness where answers should have been. It was the way the terrain seemed cursed, the way the snow swallowed not just the bodies, but the truth. And then, 19 years later, on the opposite side of the planet, the Yuba County Five disappeared into snow under equally impossible circumstances. 2 different countries. 2 different times. But too many similarities to ignore. Both groups fled shelter into lethal cold. Both groups were found half-dressed, scattered, as if running from an unseen terror. Both cases defied logic, medical understanding, and psychological profiling. And in both cases, there was no clear cause. No villain. No crime. Just confusion, death, and fear. But there's more. Investigators noted that neither group had made any real attempt to survive, despite having the means to do so. The Dyatlov hikers had access to equipment, food, and warmth. They had supplies inside the tent, and some even made a fire outside the woods. Yet they didn't return. They didn't regroup. They split and died, one by one. The Yuba Five could have used the working car. They could have used the supplies inside the trailer. One of them stayed alive for weeks, but didn't touch the rations or try to break a window for help. It was as if their will to survive had been erased. As if something had stripped them of reason and left them only with terror. And then there was the strange behavior before the incidents. The Dyatlov group, days before their deaths, had written strange entries in their expedition log. One referred to a snowman watching them from afar. Some of their photos showed unidentifiable shadows in the woods. Some believed they were being followed. But followed by what? The Yuba Five reportedly stopped at a convenience store just before heading into the mountains. The clerk remembered them seeming nervous. They bought snack food, but didn't linger. One of them, Gary Mathias, was said to be agitated. And then came the inexplicable drive into the wilderness. It was as if something was drawing both groups into isolation, into a cold, inescapable end. No connection was ever made officially. But some investigators and amateur sleuths began to ask the questions no one wanted to answer. Could there be a pattern here, buried across time and geography? Could there be something that preys not on individuals, but on groups, drawing them into the snow, into the cold, into silence? Could these cases be echoes of each other? Or worse, could they be linked by something not bound to a place or a year, something that doesn't care about borders or logic, only fear? As time went on, both cases drifted into the realms of folklore and internet obsession. The Dyatlov Pass incident became a chilling enigma of the Cold War era, buried under layers of Soviet secrecy and myth. The Yuba County Five, on the other hand, became a quiet American tragedy, overshadowed by the larger crimes of the decade but never quite forgotten by those who looked closely. And yet, neither story offered closure. Only a haunting sense of wrongness. In both cases, the deeper one looks, the more questions arise. Take the medical findings, for instance. The Dyatlov autopsies revealed signs of high internal trauma, chest cavities crushed, fractured skulls, but without corresponding surface wounds. In a typical fall, bruising would accompany such damage. But these wounds looked like something from a car crash or a shockwave. Something immense, but strangely precise. Now compare that to the Yuba County Five. When the bodies were eventually found, only 4 were recovered. One, Gary Mathias, was never located. Jack Madruga and Bill Sterling were found on opposite sides of the road, both seemingly dead from exposure. Ted Weiher was found inside a Ranger trailer, having survived potentially for weeks. He had bed sores, frostbite, and severe weight loss, but oddly, he had not touched the large amount of preserved food in the locker or attempted to light the propane heater. This wasn't just confusion. This was paralysis. Deliberate stillness. A refusal to fight for life. And there was the blanket. Someone, likely one of the group, had wrapped Ted's body carefully in layers, tucking him in. His feet were frostbitten, blackened and rotting, but someone had cared for him in those final hours. That means another one of the men must have lived long enough to tend to him, and then disappeared. Why didn't they try to escape? Why didn't they use the resources around them? Was it fear, or something else entirely? Many assume madness. Hypothermia can bring on confusion, hallucinations, and erratic behavior. But the problem with that explanation is how much organization was present. A fire had been started. Shelter had been reached. Someone had cared for Ted. These weren't the actions of people utterly lost to delusion. Something was still working in their minds. Something was holding them back. Restraining them. In the Dyatlov case, the forensic details add a layer of grim symmetry. One body was found with burned hands and charred skin, likely from trying to get too close to the fire. Another had climbed a tree, scraping skin from her palms, as if trying to escape or see something above the tree line. And those 2 final bodies found in the ravine were clothed in pieces of the other's garments, suggesting a desperate attempt to preserve heat, or perhaps that they had died last, scavenging for survival. Their injuries? Massive. One had her ribs shattered. Another had a crushed skull, as if struck by a sledgehammer. Again, no soft tissue bruising. Again, an invisible impact. Then there's the radiation. Traces were found on several of the Dyatlov hikers' clothing. No one has ever explained why. They were students, not soldiers. No known nuclear testing occurred nearby at the time. Yet there it was, radiation, where there should have been none. And in the Yuba County case, an unsettling detail often overlooked is Gary Mathias's background. He was the only one in the group with military experience. He had served in the army and been stationed in Germany, where he suffered a psychotic break. He was discharged and later diagnosed with schizophrenia, but he was functional, medicated, and close with the others. Yet after the disappearance, his body was never found. No clothes. No remains. Not even a trace. Some believe he wandered further into the mountains. Others think he might have made it out and chosen to disappear. But the more disturbing idea is that whatever caused the deaths of the others took him in a different way. And that's where the parallel starts to twist into something else. Not just coincidence. Not just 2 isolated mysteries. Something that bridges both. Something ancient and silent. Both the Urals and the Sierra Nevada mountains have long histories of folklore and superstition. In Russia, the Mansi people spoke of spirits in the mountains. In California, Native American stories warned of cursed ground and spirits that lured people into the wilderness, never to return. These weren't stories made for children, they were warnings. Warnings wrapped in metaphor, passed down through generations. Stories of entities that feed on fear, that play with perception, that can lure even the strongest minds into confusion and stillness. That's the thread that runs through both events. A deep, unnatural stillness. No footprints out of the trailer. No attempt to signal for help. No return to the safety of the tent, even when survival was still possible. It's as if both groups had been ensnared, paralyzed not by the cold, but by something colder. They weren't running from a bear. They weren't victims of coincidence. They were participants in something much older, much darker, and much more deliberate. Both incidents had all the outward signs of nature's cruelty, bitter cold, disorientation, and the slow collapse of human endurance. But when you look past the surface, a different pattern begins to emerge, one not shaped by randomness or the harshness of winter, but by something intelligent, calculating, and insidious. Survivors didn't die instantly. They deteriorated slowly. Not from immediate injury, but from some invisible force that seemed to strip away their will, their instincts, even their sense of self-preservation. In both tragedies, the environment became a trap, but not just in the physical sense. These men, healthy and prepared, walked into a space where logic began to unravel. It wasn't that they didn't know how to survive. It was that something made them forget. Made them ignore the obvious. Made them stay still when every part of them should have been screaming to move. That unnatural calm, that resignation to death, is perhaps the most chilling detail of all. Ted Weiher lying in a well-stocked cabin, starving to death with food within reach. The Dyatlov hikers running barefoot into the snow, abandoning their only shelter. No animal attack. No robbery. No sign of interpersonal violence. Just people stepping outside of reality, crossing a threshold into a mental and emotional fog they could never return from. There's a moment, in every mystery, where facts start to fold in on themselves. Where the explanation requires more than science. More than psychology. It's not about believing in the paranormal, it's about acknowledging when something falls so far outside the bounds of normal behavior that you have to ask what reality looks like when it's bent at the edges. What if these weren't accidents? What if both groups stumbled into the same kind of trap? What if they saw something, or heard something, that was never meant to be understood? Consider the geography. The Dyatlov group died near a place known as Kholat Syakhl, a name that means dead mountain in the Mansi language. A place that had always been avoided. Not just for its treacherous slopes, but because of something older, something that lived in stories told in whispers. In California, the Yuba group's car was found on a desolate mountain road, far off their expected route. The vehicle wasn't damaged, hadn't been forced off the path, and could have been easily driven out. But it wasn't. They walked away from it, into the darkness, into the forest, with no logical reason why. They both diverted from their paths. Voluntarily. Into places long associated with death and disappearance. There's a recurring element in wilderness vanishings and unexplained deaths, a strange compulsion to go off course, to walk into areas known to be dangerous or inaccessible. In many cases, the individuals seem driven by something invisible. They walk for miles, remove their clothes in sub-zero temperatures, and settle into impossible positions. And in some instances, they're found with expressions of peace, as if whatever they saw at the end replaced their fear with something worse, acceptance. That's what makes the connection between these two events more than just coincidence. It's the emotional resonance. The eerie similarities in behavior. The presence of isolation, confusion, and a kind of quiet submission that doesn't make sense under normal conditions. These weren't panic-stricken deaths. They were slow fades. Controlled descents. Like someone, or something, was watching, guiding, choosing how it would end. Both cases also share a haunting absence of struggle. Where you'd expect claw marks, barricades, or signs of resistance, there's only silence. Even Ted Weiher, wasting away in the safety of a ranger cabin, had a stack of matches nearby and a propane tank ready to go. No one ever lit a fire. Why? Did they not know how? Or had they forgotten who they were? In the Dyatlov group, the fire they started under a tree had burned only briefly. The branches were broken up to a height of 5 meters, as if someone had desperately tried to climb away from something, or toward something they didn't understand. But they came back down. And died soon after. So much preparation had gone into both trips. The Dyatlov hikers were experienced mountaineers. The Yuba Five were well supported and familiar with the area. They weren't careless. They weren't impulsive. And yet, they ended up in deadly situations that suggest they willingly walked into their own ends. Or that they were invited. Invited by what? That's the question that lingers. If it were just the cold, they would have fought it. If it were just fear, they would have run. But they didn't. They paused. Sat down. Let go. All signs point to something that didn't just terrify, it entranced. It's possible that both groups, decades and continents apart, brushed up against the same threshold. Not a place, but a condition. A boundary in the human mind where survival shuts down, not from panic, but from persuasion. Something out there doesn't chase. It whispers. And those who hear it forget how to resist. That's the darkness these cases share. The silence. The stillness. And the dreadful sense that their last moments weren't filled with screams, but with surrender. The deeper investigators dug into both cases, the less sense they made. Each detail that should have brought clarity only added another layer of confusion. The Yuba County Five were found wearing each other's clothes, their bodies spread miles apart in illogical patterns, as if they had separated not in panic, but in silence, in agreement, or under influence. In the snow-covered wilderness of Russia, Dyatlov's team left their tent slashed from the inside, escaping barefoot into a death march under the freezing sky. There was no struggle, no fight. Just an exodus into darkness. It was never chaos, it was ritual. The absence of injuries that could justify the decisions made by both groups turned suspicion toward an unseen pressure. In the Dyatlov incident, 2 hikers had crushed chests, 1 woman had her tongue removed, yet there were no external wounds that matched such internal trauma. In the Yuba case, some died of exposure, 1 from starvation, yet with supplies and shelter nearby, unused. How does someone lie in bed, fully dressed, wrapped in 8 blankets, and slowly waste away without touching the canned food or heater within arm's reach? These were not just physical deaths. These were mental erasures. And that made the public, and even authorities, uncomfortable. Both cases were quietly closed without satisfying conclusions. The Dyatlov Pass was marked with vague statements about unknown compelling forces. The Yuba County Five were written off as a tragic mistake by 5 grown men with mental challenges, an easy excuse to ignore the haunting question of why they turned off a working vehicle and walked 20 miles into deadly terrain. Authorities treated the unknown as inconvenient. But the families didn't. To them, it was never enough. Bill Sterling's mother said Bill wouldn't even leave the house without telling her where he was going. Jack Hewitt's family insisted he feared the cold and wouldn't go near snow. And yet their bodies were found on a frozen mountain in the middle of nowhere, in clothes they wouldn't have chosen, in places they never meant to go. Yuri Doroshenko's parents remembered him as fearless, but not reckless. Igor Dyatlov was meticulous in planning, not prone to irrational choices. Yet their final decisions contradicted every part of their character. Something changed them. Whether it was exposure to a sound, a light, a chemical, or something stranger, the idea takes root in both stories. These individuals were not in full control of their minds when they met their end. There's a chilling concept known as missing time in psychological and paranormal reports. Periods where people operate normally, yet have no memory of their actions, as if under a spell. Victims often act with calm detachment, carrying out strange behaviors without awareness or resistance. It fits what was observed in both groups. The movements weren't chaotic. They were guided. Some researchers believe in a natural explanation, such as infrasound. Low-frequency sound waves caused by wind patterns or geological shifts that can trigger nausea, anxiety, panic, or even hallucinations. The Dyatlov tent being found slashed from the inside could, under this theory, suggest they heard or felt something so distressing it overrode logic. But in the Yuba Five's case, no environmental trigger was ever found. No avalanche. No storm. Just a dead engine, a clean car, and 5 lives unraveling in slow motion. So why the symmetry? Why 2 events so similar in outcome, yet separated by decades and an ocean? Patterns are rarely accidental. In folklore, the most dangerous things are not those that strike with violence, but those that wait with patience. Lures. Traps. Echoes. Some theorists propose that locations like Dyatlov Pass and the Plumaz National Forest are liminal zones, places where reality is thin, where perception falters, and something else can bleed through. People who enter those spaces may be vulnerable to suggestions they don't even realize they've received. They say certain places remember tragedy. But what if certain places cause it? The strange thing is, neither group appeared to try returning to safety. In both cases, after fleeing from a secure location, the tent and the car, they didn't circle back. They wandered outward, as if drawn toward something, not away from danger. The further they moved from protection, the more their reasoning dissolved. It's almost as if once they crossed a certain boundary, their autonomy was slowly erased. Not by force, but by something far worse, influence. There's no footprint you can follow to find influence. No weapon. No DNA. Only questions, unanswered and persistent. And when cases like these remain unresolved, they become breeding grounds for fear. Not the kind that jumps out at you, but the kind that creeps in slowly. The realization that if it happened to them, healthy, prepared, full of life, it could happen to anyone. All it takes is a moment. A sound you can't place. A thought that isn't yours. A whisper, too quiet to hear, but loud enough to follow. These weren't just deaths. They were disappearances of will. The timeline in both cases begins with an ordinary plan. For the Dyatlov group, it was a well-documented skiing expedition meant to earn them hiking certification. For the Yuba Five, it was a simple trip to watch a basketball game and then return home. There was no indication of poor planning, recklessness, or spontaneity. Both groups were where they were supposed to be, until, suddenly, they weren't. What comes next in each case is a complete breakdown of predictability. The Dyatlov team veered off their intended path, making camp on the exposed slope of Kholit Syakhl instead of safer tree-covered areas. No one understood why. Experienced hikers don't make such choices lightly. For the Yuba Five, their car was found far off any reasonable route, deep into the mountains, high up a road that would have been nearly impassable that night due to snow and cold. The vehicle was in working order, yet they abandoned it without trying to dig it out or keep warm inside. This wasn't panic. It was deviation. A detour from sense. And then comes the strangest part of both stories, the silence that follows. Days passed before anyone noticed anything was wrong. For Dyatlov's group, the alarm came when they missed a telegram. For the Yuba Five, their families were worried almost immediately, but it still took time for any search to begin. When rescuers finally arrived in both cases, what they found made less sense than the disappearance itself. The Dyatlov tent had been cut open from the inside. Their belongings, shoes, coats, and supplies, were left behind. They had walked barefoot into sub-zero temperatures. Similarly, the Yuba men had left their car with no clear destination and no urgency in their tracks. No signs of a chase. No injuries suggesting a need to flee. They just left. And that left behind a vacuum. The kind of mystery that doesn't beg for an answer, but demands one. In the absence of logic, people grasp at connections. Some began comparing the two cases, not because they occurred in the same place or time, but because they felt like variations of the same nightmare. The bodies in both cases were found in scattered locations, some weeks or even months apart. In Dyatlov's case, some corpses were only half-dressed, their expressions frozen in agony. For the Yuba Five, one man made it into a Forest Service trailer, lit a fire, and wrapped himself in blankets, but never touched the canned food or turned on the propane heater, despite being capable of doing so. It was as if a mental fog settled over them at the worst possible time. How does someone die of starvation surrounded by food? The mind, under pressure, can betray its own body. Hypothermia and disorientation can lead to paradoxical undressing. But experts disagreed on whether that alone could explain what happened to either group. A few of the Dyatlov hikers suffered crushing injuries more typical of a car crash or explosion, with no external wounds. In the Yuba Five's case, none showed visible trauma or signs of a struggle. No blood. No evidence of foul play. No fingerprints other than their own. It was death in its quietest form, like they simply stopped functioning. And this is where the connection deepens. Two groups. Two remote places. Two outcomes that follow a nearly identical rhythm of confusion, strangeness, and ultimately, silence. Some have even suggested that what happened in both cases may not be specific to the events, but to the people themselves. That they were somehow chosen. Whether by coincidence, fate, or something harder to name, both groups were formed by tight bonds. The Dyatlov hikers were close friends, most of them engineering students, passionate about nature and exploration. The Yuba men were known as the boys in their community, inseparable, kind-hearted, devoted to routine and structure. These weren't random wanderers. They were cohesive units. Which makes the eventual fragmentation of each group even more unsettling. They were strongest together, and yet, something tore them apart. There are those who suggest psychological phenomena at play, shared delusion, mass psychogenic illness, or group hysteria. But these theories lack the staying power to explain the extent of the disconnect. The Dyatlov Pass hikers did not descend into madness. Their tracks showed coordinated movement before they split. The Yuba Five didn't descend into chaos either. One of them, at least, made fire and wrapped himself in blankets with meticulous care. The others may have wandered, but they weren't running blindly. It's as though something reached inside both groups and quietly altered their decisions. A subtle rewiring. Both events occurred near mountainous areas that, for centuries, carried ominous reputations. The Ural Mountains where Dyatlov's group perished have long been the subject of legends involving supernatural lights and spiritual curses. Similarly, the Sierra Nevada range has its own collection of eerie stories, strange disappearances, disoriented hikers, and phantom sightings. Locals in each region have whispered of places where the earth hums wrong, where time feels warped, where the forest stares back. Places not evil, but indifferent, where people don't die because they're hunted, but because they no longer know how to live. To outsiders, this sounds like folklore. But when enough facts stack without answers, folklore becomes the only language left. In both cases, the living were left with nothing but traces. A torn tent. A working car. Footprints that fade. Tracks that end abruptly. Eyes frozen open in expressions of terror, not from pain, but from the incomprehensible. And the question that no one has ever answered. What makes a group of people, healthy and sane, walk willingly into the heart of death? The evidence left behind offers a puzzle with pieces that refuse to fit together. In both incidents, it was as though an invisible force compelled the victims to abandon all reason, to reject warmth and safety, and march steadily toward their doom. Their choices are baffling not just because they defy logic, but because they contradict the very instincts that keep humans alive. Normally, people cling to shelter, to food, to each other, especially in hostile environments. But the Dyatlov hikers and the Yuba County Five did the opposite, they fled into the void. The question is, what could drive such behavior? One possibility is the phenomenon known as hypothermia paradox. When the human body succumbs to severe cold, victims can experience confusion and hallucinations. In extreme cases, hypothermia causes a paradoxical undressing phase, where victims shed their clothes despite the freezing temperature. Their minds deceive them into feeling overheated. This explanation has been offered for the Dyatlov Pass victims who were found partially undressed or in clothes that did not belong to them. Yet it doesn't fully explain why they would cut their tent open from the inside and venture outside without shoes or adequate clothing. The Yuba County Five scenario is even more perplexing. One of the men, John, was found alive in a Forest Service trailer, wrapped in blankets, with a fire going, but he never ate the canned food or used the heater. Why would a man, presumably capable of helping himself, choose starvation over survival? None of the men made efforts to get help or stay in the safety of their vehicle. Instead, they scattered across miles of wilderness, some found in areas difficult to access even during daylight. It suggests a state of altered mental function far beyond simple confusion or panic. Some experts propose the influence of environmental toxins. In the mountainous regions where these tragedies occurred, there could be naturally occurring gases or toxins released by the earth, carbon monoxide, methane, or even hallucinogenic molds growing on plants. Such toxins might cause disorientation, nausea, or hallucinations severe enough to drive people from safety. But no definitive evidence has been found to support this theory in either case. Tests on the bodies and surroundings failed to detect unusual substances that could explain such drastic behavior. Others turn to more eerie possibilities. Could these groups have encountered something beyond human comprehension? Something invisible, yet palpable? Both Dyatlov Pass and the remote forests near Yuba County are steeped in local legends about strange lights, mysterious creatures, and unexplained disappearances. Stories passed down warn of places where the normal rules of reality shift, where the air itself carries a strange energy that unsettles the mind. Eyewitnesses from other hikers and locals near Dyatlov Pass have reported strange glowing orbs in the sky, sudden drops in temperature, and an oppressive feeling of being watched. Similarly, the Yuba County area has its own tales of phantom sounds, footsteps in the snow, and glimpses of shadowy figures vanishing into the trees. Though often dismissed as folklore, these accounts cannot be entirely ignored when paired with the inexplicable behavior of the victims. One chilling theory suggests that these men were victims of what might be called psychic influence or mind control by an unknown entity or force. This hypothesis argues that both groups were subjected to a form of psychological manipulation so subtle that they didn't recognize it as coercion. Their minds were guided away from safety by whispers only they could hear, by shadows moving just beyond vision, by a compulsion to abandon reason and follow a path toward isolation and death. This idea, while sounding like fiction, reflects the way the victims' actions appear, coordinated, intentional, yet incomprehensible. It's not random panic, but a silent procession toward the unknown. The torn tent, the abandoned vehicle, the clothing mismatches, all signs of people caught between worlds, their wills overridden by something beyond their control. The mental state of the victims is a crucial piece. Both groups included individuals with histories of mental health struggles or neurological issues. The Yuba County Five had members with varying levels of cognitive ability, some described as socially awkward or prone to anxiety. The Dyatlov group, though physically healthy, endured extreme stress, exhaustion, and cold. Under such strain, the human mind becomes fragile, susceptible to suggestion or breakdown. But even this does not fully account for the group dynamics, how 5 men or 9 hikers could simultaneously surrender their judgment in similar, bizarre ways. This shared breakdown hints at something more collective, an unseen force acting upon the group as a whole, disrupting cohesion and reason. It is a kind of psychological contagion, but amplified and accelerated by the eerie environment and extreme conditions. When you imagine being alone in a cold wilderness, miles from help, the mind stretches thin. Thoughts grow fragmented. Sounds become distorted. Shadows lengthen into figures. In such a state, it would take only the faintest nudge to turn instinct into oblivion, caution into wandering, survival into surrender. What terrifies most is not the presence of a monster or an attacker, but the possibility that the greatest threat was inside the victims themselves, their own minds turned against them, pushed beyond endurance by forces both natural and unnatural. The thought that the wilderness doesn't just kill, but hypnotizes, breaks, and controls. The Dyatlov Pass and Yuba County cases stand as haunting monuments to this terror. They warn us that some places hold secrets no amount of logic or science can fully explain. That sometimes, the darkness isn't just around us, but inside us, and once it takes hold, it leads only one way, into the cold, silent unknown. One of the most unsettling aspects of both cases is the way time seemed to distort around the victims. In the days following their disappearance, search and rescue teams faced almost impossible conditions, but it wasn't just the weather or terrain that made the recovery so difficult. It was the eerie feeling that these men had slipped through cracks in reality itself. At Dyatlov Pass, the snowstorm that struck the hikers was brutal, and the weather reports noted rapid changes, sudden gusts of wind, and temperature plunges that would freeze exposed skin within minutes. Yet the footprints found in the snow suggest that the hikers walked away from the tent in various directions, some even climbing uphill in bare feet. Their pace was neither frantic nor haphazard but deliberate and steady, as if following some unseen force. Similarly, the Yuba County Five disappeared into the Sierra Nevada mountains amid a harsh winter storm. Their car was discovered miles off the highway on a remote road seldom traveled. The surrounding forest was dense, with deep snow and freezing temperatures. When the bodies were eventually found, scattered over a wide area, the distances between them baffled investigators. How could a small group of friends have wandered so far apart without meeting or calling out for each other? The idea of disorientation helps explain some of this behavior. Hypothermia, shock, and panic can fracture the mind, causing confusion and poor decisions. But disorientation alone does not account for the coordinated nature of their movements. Both groups, it seems, were caught in a net they could not see, drawn into places where time and space seemed to lose meaning. Time is an elusive concept in these stories. The Yuba Five were last seen after a basketball game, but their estimated time of death spans weeks, suggesting that some lingered far longer than others. One man was found in the Forest Service trailer alive but starving. How could he survive that long without nourishment or help? Why did he refuse to use the resources around him? The answers evade logic, as if time had slowed or twisted for these men. In Dyatlov Pass, the hikers' bodies were discovered over a period of months, scattered in seemingly random locations, some close to the tent, others far away, even in a ravine below the campsite. Their injuries were inconsistent, some with no apparent trauma, others with fatal internal damage but no external wounds. This disparity suggests forces beyond human violence or accident. Such anomalies invite the thought that time itself was unstable in these locations. That moment stretched and folded, trapping the victims in loops or draws beyond comprehension. It's a sensation not easily explained by science but felt by anyone who has wandered too long in isolation and cold, the disconnection from normal time, where minutes stretch into hours and reality becomes slippery. This temporal distortion fits with reports of strange phenomena in these areas. Dyatlov Pass has long been associated with mysterious lights, ghostly glows, moving spheres, and flashes that witnesses describe as unnatural. These luminous orbs were recorded on cameras, but no one could identify their source. Could they have been manifestations of some energy that warped time and space? The Sierra Nevada forests have their own stories of unexplained lights, eerie sounds echoing through the trees at night, and sudden drops in temperature. Locals speak of ghost roads, where travelers vanish, only to be found days or weeks later in different conditions. These tales echo the strange timeline of the Yuba County Five's last days. The question remains, how could such distortions affect a group of rational, experienced men? One theory considers the psychological impact of isolation combined with environmental stress. When people are trapped in extreme conditions, sensory input becomes unreliable. The brain starts filling gaps with hallucinations and false memories. Time can dilate, events may feel disconnected, and the normal markers of reality slip away. But even this doesn't fully solve the mystery. Both groups seemed aware of their surroundings enough to perform purposeful acts, cutting tent fabric, building fires, wrapping in blankets. Their minds were not fully lost. Instead, it appears that something else took control, an external force or a collective mental break that guided them like puppets. This loss of autonomy is what terrifies most. To be alive, conscious, and yet powerless to direct your own actions toward survival. The difference between living and dying comes down to a single fragile moment of control. When that moment shatters, you walk into the abyss willingly. Both groups left behind traces of this struggle. The Dyatlov hikers' tent was slashed from the inside, their belongings left behind. It was not a panic-driven escape but a deliberate decision to abandon shelter. The Yuba 5 left their car intact, their equipment unused, as if invisible hands pushed them away from safety. These actions suggest that the victims were caught between two realities, one of safety, warmth, and life, the other of cold, darkness, and oblivion. The boundary between these worlds was thin, and for reasons unknown, these men crossed over. Scientists, investigators, and storytellers have all grappled with these events, trying to grasp the invisible threads pulling these men apart. Many theories have come and gone: avalanche, secret military tests, animal attacks, mass hysteria, and supernatural interference. But none fully captures the chilling silence left behind. Perhaps the most haunting lesson from these tragedies is how fragile the human mind and body truly are when faced with forces beyond understanding. The wilderness is indifferent to human suffering. It does not seek to harm, but it does not care if harm comes. The Dyatlov Pass and Yuba County 5 cases remain open wounds in the history of unexplained disappearances. Their stories echo across decades and continents, reminding us that some mysteries defy answers. In the end, it may not matter what actually happened in those freezing nights and silent woods. What matters is the echo of their footsteps fading into the snow, the lingering questions that haunt every searcher, and the terrible thought that even when surrounded by friends and safety, the unknown can reach in and take hold. The haunting silence left behind by these men reveals a deeper fear, one not just of death, but of being utterly powerless against the unknown. What truly terrifies is not the end, but the slow, creeping unraveling of control, reason, and identity before that end arrives. In both Dyatlov Pass and the Yuba County 5 cases, the victims' final hours seem to have been consumed not by violence from others, but by a gradual dissolution of their own selves. It is as if their minds betrayed them, turning their own instincts into traps. This loss of self-control is a nightmare worse than any external threat. Consider the idea that the wilderness itself exerts a kind of influence, something unseen, subtle, yet devastating. A force that feeds on fear, loneliness, and desperation. Not a physical predator, but a psychological predator that slowly erodes sanity. This might explain why these men, despite having the tools to survive, made choices that seem irrational or suicidal. It wasn't just cold or hunger they fought, but creeping madness whispered by the wind and shadows. Some experts refer to this as environmental psychosis, a condition triggered by prolonged exposure to extreme conditions combined with isolation. Symptoms include hallucinations, paranoia, dissociation, and impaired judgment. But what if the environment itself was acting as a conduit for something else, an ancient curse or an energy beyond modern science? Local folklore often speaks of places cursed or haunted by restless spirits or unexplained phenomena. These legends rarely hold up under scientific scrutiny, yet they persist because they touch on a universal fear, that the natural world hides secrets darker than human cruelty. At Dyatlov Pass, the area's indigenous Mansi people believed in Mayachiks, evil spirits that punish those who disrespect the mountain. While these beliefs do not explain the specifics, they suggest an ancient awareness of dangers lurking in the wilderness beyond mere weather or animals. The Yuba County 5 disappeared in an area rich with Native American history and stories of spirit roads, where the veil between the living and dead is thin. Travelers are warned not to wander alone after dark, lest they become lost in a place between worlds. Whether one accepts these legends or not, they highlight a chilling truth: humans are vulnerable not only to the physical dangers of the wilderness but to the psychological and perhaps supernatural forces it may harbor. The victims' bodies tell their own tragic story. At Dyatlov Pass, some were found with fractured ribs and skull injuries, yet no external wounds that would suggest a fight or attack. Internal trauma without obvious cause. This implies immense force, but from what? A fall? An avalanche? Or something else entirely? One of the Yuba County 5 was found far from the others, his body partially buried in snow, his face frozen into a mask of despair. The distances between the bodies suggest they were separated against their will, isolated even in death. This scattering speaks to a force that fragmented their unity, breaking bonds forged in life. What happened in those last hours to break these groups apart? Was it panic triggered by a sudden, invisible threat? Or a slow, inexorable pull into the wilderness's darkest corners? Some survivors of near-death experiences speak of a pull toward a cold, empty place, a void where time and space lose meaning. Those who resist fight to return, but those who succumb drift away, losing connection to life. Could the Dyatlov hikers and Yuba County Five have felt this pull? Their actions suggest they did, leaving shelter, abandoning warmth, wandering away from help. These are not the acts of sane men fighting to survive but of minds slipping into something else entirely. This loss of agency, a voluntary surrender to an unknown force, is the most chilling part of the story. It is the terror of being alive but trapped in a nightmare where your own will is no longer your own. It's a horror far beyond monsters or murderers. It's a horror of losing yourself in the vast, indifferent wilderness, where no one can hear your screams, and your mind becomes your enemy. The unanswered questions of these cases continue to haunt investigators, families, and anyone who dares to explore the unknown. Was it nature's cruelty, human error, or something darker that claimed these men? Perhaps it will remain forever a mystery. Some doors, once opened, lead only to silence and cold. But their stories remind us of one stark truth, that even in a world ruled by logic and science, there are shadows where reason fails, where fear becomes tangible, and where the unknown waits patiently. In the end, the Dyatlov Pass incident and the Yuba County Five disappearances stand as grim warnings about the fragile line between survival and surrender, between reality and the abyss. What connects the Dyatlov Pass hikers and the Yuba County Five is more than geography or tragedy. It is the profound mystery of their disappearance into the wilderness and the unnerving silence that followed. Both cases resist explanation by conventional means, leaving an unsettling void where answers should be. One of the most perplexing factors in these disappearances is the apparent contradiction between the victims' knowledge and experience and their seemingly irrational decisions. The Dyatlov hikers were skilled, seasoned travelers familiar with harsh conditions. They understood the dangers and were prepared for the cold. Yet they abandoned their tent in the dead of night, some barefoot, in temperatures so low they could freeze within minutes. The Yuba County Five were intelligent young men, capable and aware of the risks posed by the mountains and winter. Still, they wandered away from their car, scattering across the wilderness, succumbing one by one. Why would people with the skills and awareness to survive behave as if under a spell, compelled by invisible forces to walk into death? One theory suggests that something triggered a mass psychological breakdown, an episode of group psychosis or folie à cinq, where a shared delusion overwhelms a group's collective reasoning. Under extreme stress, fear, and isolation, the mind can fracture, causing individuals to lose grip on reality and follow irrational impulses. This could explain why the Dyatlov hikers cut open their tent from the inside, escaping an unknown terror, yet left behind boots, clothing, and even valuable equipment. Their departure was not a logical flight but a panicked flight fueled by terror beyond reason. The Yuba County Five, trapped in a similarly hostile environment, also show signs of disorganized behavior. The man who died in the ranger's cabin had access to food and warmth but did not eat. Another wandered into the snow alone, far from shelter, suggesting a loss of coherent thought. However, this explanation only deepens the mystery. What could have induced such profound fear or delusion in these men, who were strong, intelligent, and prepared? Natural phenomena like hypothermia are known to cause hallucinations and impaired judgment. Hypothermia victims often feel paradoxical heat and remove clothing, which could explain the hikers' scant attire. But hypothermia does not cause people to scatter or walk deliberately into dangerous conditions, it usually triggers attempts to return to shelter. Avalanche or infrasound from wind currents have been proposed as possible triggers. Low-frequency sounds can induce panic and unease in humans, causing irrational behavior. Yet, no conclusive evidence of an avalanche or unusual infrasound was found at Dyatlov Pass. The terrain around the Yuba County Five's car did not show signs of natural disasters either. Another chilling idea is that the victims encountered something unnatural, an unknown presence or force that caused terror so overwhelming it shattered their minds. Some speculate about secret military experiments involving radiation or sonic weapons. Others suggest supernatural intervention, spirits, curses, or alien encounters. While these theories lack hard evidence, they underscore the profound uncertainty that shrouds these cases. The link between the two incidents is not just thematic but psychological. Both involved groups trapped in wild, isolated places where normal rules seemed to break down. Both showed signs of mental collapse in the face of invisible pressures. Both ended in death, scattered and silent, their stories frozen in time like shards of a broken mirror. There is also the unsettling presence of time distortion. In both cases, timelines are confusing and contradictory. The Yuba County Five vanished in February 1978, but some bodies were found weeks later in different states of preservation. The man in the cabin lived for days without eating, though food was readily available. This suggests a break not only in space but in time, or at least in perception of time. At Dyatlov Pass, evidence suggests the hikers died over several days. Their scattered bodies show different levels of decomposition and injuries inconsistent with a single event. This temporal fragmentation adds another layer to the mystery, hinting at forces bending time itself or at least how it was experienced by the victims. What if time slowed or stretched for them, trapping them in a liminal space between life and death, where the normal flow of events dissolved into confusion and terror? This notion, though speculative, resonates with accounts from survivors of extreme conditions who describe strange sensations of timelessness and altered reality. It suggests that extreme environmental stressors can fracture perception, making reality itself seem unreal. Whatever the cause, the victims of Dyatlov Pass and the Yuba County Five suffered a profound rupture from reality, an unraveling of time, place, and self that led to their deaths. Their stories force us to confront a terrifying truth, that the wilderness is not just a physical challenge but a psychological crucible. It can fracture the mind as surely as it can freeze the body. It can isolate us not only from help but from ourselves. Their fate is a stark reminder that survival depends not only on skill and preparation but on the fragile stability of the human mind in the face of the unknown. In these silent mountains and forests, echoes of their final moments linger like ghosts, unanswered questions carved into ice and snow. The Dyatlov Pass incident and the Yuba County Five case remain warnings of what can happen when men face the wild unknown, stripped of certainty and sanity. And until we understand what truly happened, the wilderness will continue to hold its secrets tightly, inviting only the bravest, or the most foolhardy, to enter and risk losing themselves in its silent grip. The mysterious silence left behind by both the Dyatlov Pass hikers and the Yuba County Five continues to echo in the minds of those who study their stories. Despite decades of investigation, no definitive cause has been established. Instead, these cases remain emblematic of a deeper, more unsettling question: how well do we truly understand the limits of human endurance and the wild forces that test it? In the aftermath of these tragedies, investigators combed through every scrap of evidence, desperate to piece together the puzzle. For Dyatlov Pass, the physical clues were baffling: footprints leading away from the tent in the snow, some barefoot or in socks, suggesting haste and fear. The tent itself was found torn open from the inside, an indication that the hikers fled in panic. Yet no signs of a struggle or attack were evident, and some injuries defied simple explanation. For the Yuba County Five, the abandoned car was the starting point for a harrowing search, but the trail quickly grew cold and confusing. The scattered bodies, found months later in separate locations, bore no obvious wounds consistent with foul play. The most haunting discovery was the man found alive but malnourished in the ranger's cabin, surrounded by food he never ate. His failure to eat, despite obvious hunger, remains one of the strangest and most tragic aspects of the case. What causes a person to ignore survival instinct, the most primal drive of all? The answer might lie in the fragile balance between mind and body, a balance easily tipped by trauma, isolation, and fear. The wilderness strips away the familiar and the safe, exposing the raw nerves of our being. Without the comforting structure of civilization, our minds can unravel in unexpected ways. Theories about paradoxical undressing explain how hypothermia victims sometimes remove their clothes due to a sensation of burning heat caused by failing circulation. This might explain why some of the Dyatlov hikers were found inadequately clothed. Yet this phenomenon alone cannot account for why they left a secure tent and scattered into the blizzard. Could there have been an external threat so terrifying it forced them into irrational decisions? Some experts have proposed the possibility of a sudden avalanche or katabatic wind, an extremely fast, cold gust capable of causing panic. But evidence for an avalanche was minimal, and weather records do not conclusively support the presence of such winds that night. The more speculative theories hint at secret military testing in the area, involving radiation or sonic weapons. Reports surfaced years later of high radiation levels on some victims' clothing, fueling rumors of covert experiments. But these theories remain unproven and controversial. In contrast, the Yuba County Five case exposes the vulnerability of even experienced individuals when confronted with isolation and disorientation. The men were capable and intelligent, but something shattered their sense of direction and purpose. The man in the cabin, Jerry, as he was later identified, survived for days but refused to eat or signal for help, a behavior that seems incomprehensible through a purely rational lens. Psychologists speculate that he may have been suffering from a condition called psychogenic stupor, where extreme stress causes a person to become catatonic or dissociated from reality. This state can paralyze the will to survive, trapping individuals in a mental void even as their bodies weaken. In many ways, these tragedies reveal a paradox, that the human mind is both resilient and terrifyingly fragile. Our survival depends not just on physical strength or preparation, but on the elusive stability of mental clarity under pressure. There is also the haunting idea that the wilderness itself is indifferent, even hostile. Unlike a predator that strikes for food or defense, the cold mountain or dark forest simply exists, unfeeling, merciless. It neither knows nor cares about human life. In this indifferent vastness, the real enemy is loneliness. Isolation from help, from familiarity, from certainty. This isolation can distort perception and warp thought, creating shadows where none should be. Some have turned to folklore and supernatural explanations to fill the gaps left by science. Local legends speak of spirits guarding the mountains or cursed places where travelers vanish. While these stories cannot be proven, they reveal a collective fear that some places resist human intrusion, exacting a terrible price on those who dare enter. This intersection of the known and the unknown is where the Dyatlov Pass incident and the Yuba County Five disappearances dwell, a liminal space between fact and myth, logic and terror. Their stories compel us to ask not only what happened, but how much we can ever truly know about the forces that shape our fate. They remind us that nature's wild places still hold secrets beyond our grasp, places where the mind can fracture and reality can slip away. And they leave us with a haunting question: in the face of overwhelming fear and the vast unknown, how long can the human spirit hold on before it too is lost? In both the Dyatlov Pass incident and the Yuba County Five disappearance, the role of human error and chance cannot be overlooked, yet they fail to fully explain the depth of mystery surrounding these events. In wilderness survival, every decision matters: the choice of route, when to rest, how to conserve energy, and how to respond to danger. But when experienced individuals make seemingly irrational choices, it suggests that something beyond mere misjudgment was at work. The hikers at Dyatlov Pass were no novices. They were familiar with harsh conditions, skilled in survival techniques, and equipped with necessary gear. Yet something compelled them to abandon their tent, even cutting through the fabric in desperation, exposing themselves to lethal cold without adequate clothing. The decision to leave the tent in such a manner was not logical. This act hints at an acute, overwhelming fear or urgency, perhaps the feeling that whatever was outside was more dangerous than the cold itself. Similarly, the Yuba County Five had just attended a basketball game, a routine activity far removed from wilderness survival. When their car was found abandoned miles away from the highway, investigators initially thought they might have been trying to seek help. But their scattering across the forest, the odd placement of their bodies, and the fact that one man refused to eat despite being alive all point to mental disorientation or external factors disrupting their capacity to survive. Environmental hazards, such as the cold, altitude, and terrain, can cause confusion and impair judgment. Hypothermia can induce delirium, but it is unlikely to cause coordinated group behavior that leads to everyone fleeing their shelter at once. This behavior more closely resembles a collective response to a sudden and terrifying threat. What that threat was remains speculative. Could it have been an animal attack? There were no signs of such an encounter, no claw marks, no blood trails, no remains of predator scavenging. Could it have been a natural disaster? Evidence of an avalanche is disputed, and no seismic activity was recorded. Could it have been a military test gone wrong? Some believe secret tests involving radiation or sonic weaponry may have caused panic or injury, but no official records support this. In the Yuba County Five case, the man found alive in the cabin but refusing to eat is a puzzle that hints at psychological trauma or dissociation. It raises the question: how often do mental barriers become as deadly as physical dangers? His inaction could be a form of survival paradox, his body willing but his mind overwhelmed, unable to act. The human brain, especially under duress, can trigger fight, flight, or freeze responses. While fight or flight are active attempts to escape danger, freezing or dissociating can immobilize individuals, leaving them vulnerable. This freeze response may explain why one of the Yuba County Five did not leave the cabin or eat despite being able. Another factor worth exploring is the impact of isolation on group dynamics. When cut off from outside help, stress levels rise, and cohesion can break down. The Dyatlov hikers were isolated by geography and weather, while the Yuba County Five were isolated by circumstance and disorientation. The lack of communication and the gradual breakdown of trust or morale may have contributed to irrational decisions. The eerie silence surrounding these cases also points to an absence of witnesses or survivors who could shed light on the final hours. This silence deepens the mystery, leaving only physical evidence and speculation. In both incidents, the landscape itself acted as a silent, indifferent antagonist. The snow and cold did not discriminate, they claimed everyone equally. Yet the humans in these stories were not merely victims of nature's indifference, they were caught in a psychological battle with their own minds, fighting to stay rational amidst incomprehensible fear. The idea of the unknown plays a crucial role here. Humans fear what they cannot understand or predict. The terror that drove the Dyatlov hikers from their tent and scattered the Yuba County Five through the forest may have been a primal fear, a fear not of a visible enemy, but of the invisible, the inexplicable. This intangible terror is what haunts these stories, creating an atmosphere that no physical explanation fully captures. It is the fear that grips when the world shifts from familiar to alien, when instincts fail, and reason crumbles. These cases continue to inspire theories in popular culture, from horror movies and books to conspiracy theories, because they tap into universal fears, of isolation, the wilderness, and losing control. But beyond the speculation and sensationalism lies a profound human tragedy. These were young men full of potential, caught in moments of terror that stripped away their chance to survive. Their final days reveal not only the cruelty of nature but also the fragile limits of human endurance. In contemplating their fate, we are reminded that survival is never guaranteed. It depends not only on preparation and strength but on the unpredictable variables of mind and environment. Sometimes, despite all efforts, the wilderness demands a price too high to pay. The Dyatlov Pass incident and the Yuba County Five disappearance are chapters in a larger story about human vulnerability, the power of fear, and the enduring mystery of the wild places on Earth. The aftermath of the Yuba County Five disappearance left a lasting impact on the families, the community, and the nation. While the Dyatlov Pass hikers vanished in a remote and forbidding part of the Soviet Union, the Yuba County Five case unfolded much closer to home, in California, yet it was no less mystifying. The tragedy rippled through the lives of those left behind, challenging their understanding of what had happened and why. When the men disappeared after the basketball game, initial hopes were high that they would be found safe and sound. But days turned to weeks, and the search grew more desperate. The discovery of their abandoned car miles away from the highway raised more questions than answers. Why did they leave their vehicle in such a remote, rugged area? Why were their bodies scattered over such a vast wilderness, some found months later in spots that seemed impossible to reach without assistance? These questions haunted the community and investigators alike. The man found alive in the ranger's cabin, Jerry, was the last link to the group, yet he was unable or unwilling to explain what had transpired. His refusal to eat, despite his obvious starvation, was a heartbreaking testament to the psychological toll the ordeal had taken. In his final days, he was trapped in his own mind, a prisoner of trauma and despair. Families of the missing men endured an agonizing wait, clinging to hope as the search stretched on. When the bodies were eventually found, the shock and sorrow were overwhelming. Grieving families faced the cruel reality that their loved ones had endured unimaginable fear and isolation before succumbing. Public reaction was a mixture of sympathy, confusion, and frustration. How could such experienced, capable young men vanish into thin air and then be found in such puzzling circumstances? Why was there no clear cause of death, no signs of struggle, no explanation that fit the facts? The Yuba County Five case became a symbol of the unpredictability and peril of the wilderness, even for those who thought they were prepared. It also highlighted the limits of human endurance, not just physical strength, but mental resilience. In the years following, the case inspired countless theories, ranging from the plausible to the far-fetched. Some suggested they became lost after taking a wrong turn, succumbing to the elements. Others speculated about foul play or secret government involvement. But none of these theories could fully explain the odd behaviors, like Jerry's refusal to eat or the scattered locations of the bodies. The psychological concept of groupthink may offer insight into how the men's decisions deteriorated over time. Under extreme stress, groups can fall into patterns of conformity or irrational decision-making, especially when isolated from outside influence. Panic can spread quickly, leading to actions that seem illogical in hindsight. The absence of witnesses or survivors to recount the final hours leaves only the cold facts and chilling possibilities. This void creates space for the imagination to fill in the gaps, often with fears and scenarios far darker than reality. Similarly, the Dyatlov Pass incident shook the Soviet Union and the wider world. The official investigations revealed baffling evidence, injuries inconsistent with an accident, radiation traces, and the disturbing condition of the campsite. The mystery surrounding the hikers' deaths was further intensified by Soviet secrecy and the political climate of the time, which limited information release. Over time, unofficial reports and declassified files fueled conspiracy theories and speculation. Some believed the hikers were victims of secret military experiments, others theorized about Yeti or other supernatural forces. The true story, however, may be simpler yet no less tragic, a combination of environmental danger, fear, and human frailty. What ties these two cases together beyond the surface of missing persons and mysterious deaths is the profound exploration of fear itself, how it shapes human behavior and survival. Fear can trigger extraordinary courage or paralyzing terror. It can bind a group together or tear it apart. In the frozen expanse of the Urals or the rugged forests of Northern California, fear became a silent killer, pushing individuals beyond their limits and breaking down the mental defenses needed to survive. Both cases serve as chilling reminders that no amount of preparation can completely guard against the unknown. Nature holds power over even the strongest, and when faced with overwhelming uncertainty, the human mind can falter. They also compel us to remember the individuals lost, not just as statistics or legends, but as people with hopes, fears, and loved ones. Their stories demand empathy and respect, even as the mysteries endure. The legacy of these tragedies continues to inspire those who study survival, psychology, and wilderness exploration. They challenge experts to understand the delicate balance between physical endurance and mental fortitude, and to prepare future adventurers for not only the visible dangers but the unseen forces of fear and isolation. The Dyatlov Pass incident and the Yuba County Five disappearances stand as haunting chapters in the annals of unsolved mysteries, bound together by geography, circumstance, and the unforgiving wild. Each case is a testament to the unpredictability of the natural world and the fragile resilience of those who venture into it. And they remind us that sometimes, even the mystery surrounding the Yuba County Five has continued to baffle experts, psychologists, and survival specialists for decades. Despite extensive investigations, many critical questions remain unanswered. What exactly caused these young men to become so disoriented that they abandoned their car in the middle of the night and wandered deep into the wilderness? Why did one of them survive for weeks in a cabin, refusing sustenance, only to die a slow, agonizing death? How could experienced individuals, familiar with their surroundings, succumb to such a fatal sequence of events without any clear external cause? Psychological trauma plays a significant role in understanding the behavior of the Yuba County Five, especially Jerry, who was found alive but unable or unwilling to save himself. Trauma can incapacitate the mind and body in ways that defy logic. The phenomenon of survival guilt or post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, can push people into states of denial or dissociation, where even basic instincts like eating or seeking help are overridden by an overwhelming sense of despair or fear. This leads to the haunting question of whether the men's mental states deteriorated gradually, triggered by the cold and exhaustion, or whether something more immediate and terrifying forced their flight into the forest. The pattern of their death suggests a breakdown in cohesion. Instead of sticking together and conserving strength, they scattered, making survival even more difficult. Similar patterns emerge in other wilderness disappearances and tragedies, where groups under extreme stress fragment and individuals make decisions that seem counterintuitive from a rational standpoint. Panic, confusion, and fear can scramble the mind's ability to function, sometimes with deadly results. In the Dyatlov Pass incident, the abrupt and chaotic nature of the hikers' actions reveals a similar psychological storm. Cutting their way out of the tent and fleeing into sub-zero temperatures in various states of undress points to a sudden and overwhelming fear that disrupted their ability to reason or organize. The injuries found on some of the Dyatlov hikers, including fractured skulls and ribs, alongside inexplicable internal trauma with no external wounds, deepen the mystery. These injuries suggest a forceful impact, but no evidence of a struggle or attack was found. This has led some experts to speculate about phenomena such as infrasound-induced panic, a natural acoustic phenomenon caused by wind patterns that can trigger extreme anxiety and disorientation. Infrasound is barely perceptible to humans but can induce nausea, panic, and a sense of doom. It's conceivable that such a natural force, combined with the harsh environment and the pressure of being far from safety, could have driven the hikers into a terrifying flight response. The Yuba County Five situation might not have involved infrasound, but the psychological and environmental pressures they faced were just as real and dangerous. The mountainous terrain, freezing temperatures, and dense forests created a hostile environment where one wrong step or a moment of confusion could lead to disaster. Additionally, the role of alcohol cannot be dismissed. Some reports suggest the men might have consumed alcohol at the basketball game or afterward, which could have impaired judgment, coordination, and their ability to survive in the wilderness. Even small amounts of alcohol can be deadly when combined with hypothermia risk. The combination of psychological stress, environmental hazards, and possible impaired judgment forms a complex web of factors that likely contributed to the tragedy. It challenges simplistic explanations and calls for a multidimensional approach to understanding survival failures. Both the Dyatlov Pass incident and the Yuba County Five disappearance underscore the fragile boundary between life and death in the wilderness. They remind us that survival depends not only on physical preparedness but also on mental resilience, clear thinking, and sometimes, sheer luck. The lessons drawn from these tragedies have informed search and rescue techniques, wilderness survival training, and psychological support protocols. They highlight the importance of mental health awareness in survival situations and the need for immediate intervention when trauma strikes. Ultimately, these stories remain cautionary tales about the unpredictable nature of the wild and the human mind. They speak to something primal and universal, the fight for survival in the face of the unknown. Despite decades of study and speculation, the true events that unfolded in the forests of Northern California and the slopes of the Ural Mountains remain locked in silence, whispered only by the wind and the snow. Their legacy endures as a reminder that some mysteries may never be fully solved, and some fears are too deep to ever be completely understood. The emotional weight of the Yuba County Five tragedy extends beyond the facts of their disappearance and deaths. It reverberates through the lives of the families who waited anxiously, hoping against hope for their safe return. The anguish of not knowing, the torment of unanswered questions, and the slow unraveling of hope are as much a part of the story as the mystery itself. Each family had to confront the unimaginable, the disappearance of a son, a brother, a friend, swallowed by an unforgiving wilderness with no clear explanation. The initial belief that the men were simply lost or stranded was replaced by growing dread as days passed with no sign of rescue. The discovery of the abandoned car, left unlocked, with personal belongings inside, was an eerie sign that something was terribly wrong. When the first bodies were found, the relief of confirmation was shattered by the circumstances. The men had died not in a single event but scattered across the mountainside, in conditions that suggested a struggle against nature and possibly against their own minds. One was found at the bottom of a steep slope, another miles away in the woods, a third in a secluded cabin, with Jerry, the last survivor, succumbing alone despite being in proximity to shelter and food. The story of Jerry's final days is especially poignant. Found alive but in a state of semi-consciousness, refusing to eat or drink, he embodied the tragic paradox of survival instinct defeated by despair. His inability or unwillingness to save himself challenges our understanding of human nature and survival psychology. Sometimes, trauma and fear can override even the strongest survival instincts. The community response was immediate and heartfelt. Volunteers, search and rescue teams, and local law enforcement worked tirelessly to find the missing men, combing the forests and mountains with determination and hope. Yet, the rugged terrain and harsh weather conditions made the search perilous and slow. As news of the discovery spread, public fascination grew, mingled with sorrow and speculation. The case became a symbol of the harsh unpredictability of nature, of how even the young and healthy are vulnerable to the forces of the wilderness. It sparked discussions about preparedness, mental health in survival situations, and the limits of human endurance. The media coverage was intense, but it often focused on sensational theories rather than the human tragedy. Conspiracy theories flourished, ranging from secret government experiments to encounters with unknown creatures. These theories, while captivating, often overshadowed the real victims, the 5 young men whose lives were cut short under mysterious circumstances. In many ways, the Yuba County Five became a modern myth, a cautionary tale repeated in survival courses, wilderness training programs, and documentaries. Their story is studied not just for the mystery but for the lessons it imparts about human behavior under extreme stress. Psychologists have examined the group dynamics, the possible effects of panic, isolation, and hypothermia on decision-making. Survival experts analyze the choices made, the navigation errors, and the environmental challenges faced by the men. The case illustrates how quickly a situation can spiral from a minor problem into a fatal crisis when fear and confusion take hold. The similarities with the Dyatlov Pass incident deepen the intrigue. Both groups were experienced, physically fit, and mentally prepared for outdoor conditions. Yet, both vanished under baffling circumstances, with evidence pointing to intense psychological trauma and extreme environmental pressures. The Dyatlov Pass hikers faced freezing temperatures, deep snow, and the challenges of mountainous terrain, just as the Yuba County Five contended with thick forests, steep slopes, and frigid conditions. Both groups exhibited signs of panic and disorientation, suggesting that fear itself may have been the deadliest adversary. These tragedies also raise broader questions about how humans respond to the unknown and the unpredictable. In moments of crisis, the mind seeks explanations, clings to hope, or succumbs to despair. The wilderness strips away the distractions of modern life and exposes raw vulnerability. For the families, the unanswered questions remain a heavy burden. The desire for closure clashes with the reality that some mysteries resist resolution. Yet, even without all the answers, the memory of the men endures, honored in stories, memorials, and the hearts of those who knew them. Their disappearance and deaths remind us of the fragile thread between life and death, sanity and madness, hope and despair. They compel us to respect the wilderness not only for its beauty but for its merciless power. And they challenge us to understand the complex interplay of nature, psychology, and fate. The Yuba County Five may never have a definitive explanation for what happened in those final days. But their story continues to teach us about the human condition, our strengths, our vulnerabilities, and the enduring mystery of survival. The enigmatic tragedy of the Yuba County Five invites deep reflection on the interplay between environment and human psychology when confronted with survival scenarios. The dense forests, steep slopes, and freezing temperatures of the Sierra Nevada range create an unforgiving backdrop that magnifies any mistake or misjudgment. But it is not just nature that plays a role. Within every survival story lies the human mind, wrestling with fear, hope, and desperation. One of the most haunting aspects of the Yuba County Five case is the absence of any clear external threat. Unlike typical wilderness disappearances that might involve animal attacks, avalanches, or criminal activity, there was no evidence pointing to foul play. No signs of struggle or defensive wounds, no evidence of encounters with hostile individuals, and no clear natural disasters that could account for the men's desperate flight and ultimate demise. This absence suggests a psychological collapse induced by the environment, a terrifying loss of orientation, judgment, and cohesion. The human brain, when overwhelmed by stressors like cold, fatigue, and isolation, can enter states of confusion and panic. This can lead to what survival experts call paradoxical undressing, where victims remove clothing despite hypothermia, or terminal burrowing, where people hide in enclosed spaces as their bodies shut down. In the case of the Yuba County Five, the men's abandonment of their car in the middle of the night without essential supplies suggests they were driven by an urgent, irrational fear. The car was unlocked, keys left inside, and personal items untouched, signs that whatever fear overtook them was sudden and overwhelming. They fled into the night, scattering and losing contact with one another, each succumbing to the cold and disorientation in different locations. The discovery of Jerry's body in a remote cabin adds another layer of tragic complexity. His survival for weeks, close to food and warmth, yet dying of starvation and dehydration, hints at a mental or emotional barrier preventing him from helping himself. Psychological conditions such as severe depression, delirium, or a trauma-induced shutdown can explain why a person might refuse sustenance or medical help, even when survival depends on it. Comparing this to the Dyatlov Pass incident, we find echoes of similar psychological responses. The hikers fled their tent in sub-zero temperatures, some only partially dressed, suggesting an uncontrollable terror. The bizarre injuries, like fractured ribs without external wounds and unexplained internal trauma, hint at forces beyond normal explanation, perhaps a combination of panic-induced falls and severe environmental factors. Both cases reveal the fragile boundary between rational survival instincts and the overwhelming power of fear and confusion. When the mind is pushed beyond its limits, even the strongest individuals can become victims of their own instincts gone awry. Survival is often thought of as a physical challenge, enduring cold, hunger, injury, but the psychological challenge is equally vital. Maintaining mental clarity, controlling panic, and working cohesively as a group can make the difference between life and death. When these break down, chaos ensues. In wilderness survival literature, the importance of mental resilience is repeatedly emphasized. Stories like the Yuba County Five serve as stark reminders that physical preparation alone is not enough. Mental health, group dynamics, and the ability to adapt under extreme pressure are just as critical. These cases also expose how little we truly understand about human behavior under extreme duress. Scientific research continues to study how the brain reacts to prolonged stress and isolation, uncovering mechanisms that can trigger disorientation, memory loss, or impaired decision-making. The mystery surrounding the Yuba County Five and the Dyatlov Pass hikers invites speculation about the unknown limits of human endurance. Could environmental factors trigger neurological responses that mimic injury or hallucination? Could some natural phenomena create overwhelming fear or paralysis in the brain? Experts have proposed theories ranging from infrasound, hypothermia-induced delirium, sudden weather phenomena, to even more obscure possibilities. While some theories remain speculative, they highlight the complexity of the human response to wilderness emergencies. The cultural impact of these tragedies is profound. They have inspired countless books, documentaries, and fictionalized accounts, each exploring different angles, whether scientific, supernatural, or psychological. They have become emblematic of the human struggle against nature's indifferent forces. For those who study wilderness survival, these cases serve as lessons in humility. No amount of preparation can fully guard against the unpredictable, nor the mental toll of isolation and fear. The stories urge caution, respect for nature, and an understanding that sometimes, survival depends on factors beyond knowledge and skill. The Yuba County Five's fate continues to haunt the collective consciousness, a silent warning whispered through the trees and mountains they vanished into. Their story is a testament to the unknown dangers lurking not just in the wilderness, but within the human mind when pushed to its limits. As investigators, psychologists, and survival experts revisit these events, the hope remains that greater understanding can emerge, not only to prevent future tragedies but to appreciate the complex dance between mind, body, and nature. The wilderness is beautiful, but it is also unforgiving. And sometimes, the greatest peril comes not from the environment itself, but from the invisible battles waged inside the human mind. In the aftermath of the Yuba County Five tragedy, investigators faced an uphill battle piecing together the timeline and understanding the final hours of these 5 young men. The physical evidence was sparse and confusing, leaving more questions than answers. Without witnesses, the mystery relied heavily on forensic findings, environmental clues, and psychological profiling to build a plausible narrative. The initial search had been complicated by the rugged, unforgiving terrain and harsh winter weather conditions. The Sierra Nevada's deep forests and rocky slopes were difficult to traverse, limiting the areas that could be searched quickly. It took weeks before the bodies were found in scattered locations, some miles apart, suggesting that the men had become separated in their attempts to survive. One key piece of evidence was the state of the car. The vehicle had been abandoned under unusual circumstances. It was left unlocked, with personal belongings inside, keys still in the ignition, and the engine running. This suggested that the men had left suddenly and possibly in panic, leaving behind what should have been essential supplies for survival in the wilderness. Their decision to leave the car in the dead of night, without proper clothing or equipment, signaled an extreme psychological break, something more than a simple disorientation or navigation error. Experts theorize that the men may have been responding to an unseen or imagined threat that drove them into the wilderness. This mental state, perhaps amplified by exhaustion, hypothermia, and stress, created a terrifying scenario where logic was abandoned in favor of instinctive flight. Panic and fear overwhelmed reason, and the men scattered in different directions, each fighting for survival in isolation. The forensic examination of the bodies revealed no external signs of violence or trauma that would indicate foul play. Instead, the cause of death for most appeared to be hypothermia. Yet, the scattered locations and the absence of attempts to reunite suggested that the men's mental condition prevented coordinated survival efforts. Jerry's death inside the ranger's cabin was particularly puzzling. Despite having access to shelter, firewood, and food, he succumbed to starvation and dehydration. This indicated a profound psychological collapse, possibly a severe case of what modern psychology might call survival despair, where the will to live is extinguished despite external means for survival. The possibility that Jerry was too mentally incapacitated to feed himself or start a fire opens discussions on how trauma can incapacitate the mind in life-threatening situations. It challenges assumptions about human resilience and survival instincts. The overall timeline of the men's disappearance and death also highlights the brutal impact of the Sierra Nevada winter. Temperatures at night dropped far below freezing, and the risk of exposure was ever present. Even healthy, fit young men with some outdoor experience were no match for the relentless cold and disorienting darkness. The forest environment amplified these dangers. The dense tree cover could disrupt navigation by blocking landmarks and stars. The rugged terrain with steep slopes and deep ravines made movement difficult and exhausting. Snow and ice underfoot added to the hazard, increasing the risk of falls or injury. In such a setting, even a minor injury or a simple misstep could turn fatal. When combined with hypothermia's effects, impaired judgment, slowed reaction times, and increasing confusion, the men's chances rapidly diminished. The psychological toll of isolation also cannot be underestimated. Separated and lost, with no way to communicate, each man faced the terrifying prospect of dying alone. Loneliness, fear, and despair become as deadly as the cold itself. The Yuba County Five case, like the Dyatlov Pass incident, reveals the complex and often brutal interplay between physical danger and psychological breakdown. The wilderness tests not only the body's endurance but the mind's ability to cope with extreme stress and uncertainty. Understanding these cases requires not only examining physical evidence but also interpreting the emotional and mental states that drive human behavior in crisis. The mystery remains not just in what happened, but why it happened the way it did. The tragedy also shines a light on the importance of preparedness, not just in terms of gear and physical fitness but in mental training. Wilderness survival experts stress that knowledge, planning, and psychological readiness can mean the difference between life and death. Ultimately, the story of the Yuba County Five is a somber reminder of nature's indifference and the fragility of human life. It challenges us to respect the power of the wild and the limits of our own endurance. It also leaves a haunting question: what unseen fears or forces can drive even the strongest among us to abandon all reason and flee into the night, only to disappear without a trace? The Yuba County Five case, though grounded in a specific and harrowing event, raises broader questions about human vulnerability and the unpredictable nature of survival in extreme conditions. While the physical dangers of hypothermia, starvation, and injury are well documented, what remains elusive is the psychological fracture that seems to have occurred among these men, a fracture that turned a tragic situation into a complete mystery. One of the most chilling elements of the case is the way the men's final actions contradict basic survival instincts. Their departure from the car without adequate clothing, the lack of effort to stay together, and Jerry's prolonged suffering in a nearby cabin with accessible resources all point to a mental collapse rather than just physical misfortune. The phenomenon of psychological disintegration during survival situations has been observed in many cases, though never fully understood. It's not simply fear that causes panic, but an overwhelming loss of cognitive function, a shutdown of rational thought that can lead to catastrophic decisions. Hypothermia itself can induce confusion, irrational behavior, and even a false sense of warmth, leading victims to undress and expose themselves further to the cold. This physiological effect could partly explain some of the Yuba Five's actions, but it doesn't fully account for the deeper psychological despair evident in Jerry's isolated death. This despair might stem from a combination of factors: isolation, exhaustion, fear, and a sense of hopelessness. The wilderness becomes not just a physical trap but a psychological prison, where the mind loses the will to survive. The Yuba County Five were young, intelligent men with promising futures. They weren't inexperienced or unprepared in the typical sense. Yet, even their strengths were insufficient against the invisible adversary of psychological collapse. Their story invites speculation about the role of group dynamics under extreme stress. Groups often survive better than individuals in harsh conditions due to mutual support, shared resources, and collective problem-solving. However, when fear fractures trust and cohesion, survival chances plummet. The men scattering through the forest may have been a result of fear-induced disorientation, but also of a breakdown in communication and leadership. Without a clear leader or plan, panic can fragment groups, sending individuals into isolation and vulnerability. The discovery of personal effects and scattered bodies kilometers apart suggests that the men tried desperately to find safety or each other but were thwarted by terrain, weather, and their own deteriorating conditions. In this way, the Yuba County Five tragedy underscores a chilling truth about survival situations, that the mind can be as deadly a force as any natural element. Survival is as much about maintaining mental clarity, hope, and group cohesion as it is about physical endurance. When these psychological pillars crumble, even the best prepared and most capable individuals can fall victim to seemingly irrational decisions. Panic, despair, and confusion become lethal. This understanding has practical implications for wilderness training, search and rescue operations, and even disaster preparedness. Emphasizing mental resilience, leadership skills, and emotional support can improve outcomes in emergency situations. The Yuba County Five's disappearance and deaths remain a cautionary tale, a reminder that the wilderness is a test not just of body but of mind. And in the silence of the snowy forests where they vanished, their story echoes as a somber warning, that sometimes, the greatest danger lies within. Their fate continues to haunt investigators, families, and those who study survival psychology. The unanswered questions linger. What exactly triggered their flight into the night? What was the invisible fear that shattered their minds and led to their tragic end? Though decades have passed, the mystery persists, inviting new generations to reflect on the delicate balance between human courage and frailty in the face of nature's overwhelming power. One of the most haunting aspects of the Yuba County Five case is how it exposes the fragility of human survival when faced with the unknown. These young men, who should have been full of hope and vitality, were undone not by violence or external aggression, but by a series of events and mental states that remain baffling and deeply unsettling. Their disappearance and deaths occurred in a landscape that is both beautiful and brutal, a wilderness that demands respect and careful preparation. But more than the physical environment, it was the invisible psychological forces at play that shaped their final hours. Fear, confusion, and despair warped their perceptions and decisions, leading them down a path none could have foreseen. It's difficult to imagine the mental state of a person who, despite being cold and hungry, makes the choice to leave the safety of a car, which contains supplies and warmth, and walk into the dark, freezing forest without proper gear. Yet that is exactly what these men did. Their actions defy simple logic, pointing to a profound psychological crisis. In the days following their disappearance, search parties combed the wilderness, uncovering clues that seemed to deepen the mystery rather than solve it. Items of clothing were found abandoned, some partially removed, others arranged strangely. The men's scattered locations, separated by miles, suggested they had become hopelessly disoriented and isolated. The slow and painful discovery of their bodies painted a picture of desperate survival attempts, signs of movement and struggle, makeshift shelter constructions, and injuries consistent with falls or environmental hazards. Yet there was no evidence of external attack or foul play. This led experts to focus on the physiological and psychological effects of hypothermia, starvation, and mental breakdown. Hypothermia is known to cause paradoxical undressing, confusion, and impaired judgment. But the depth of despair and isolation that Jerry experienced in the ranger's cabin suggests that mental exhaustion and hopelessness played an even larger role. His death inside a shelter filled with food and warmth is one of the most tragic elements of the story. It reveals how survival is not just about physical resources but the will to live. When the mind succumbs to despair, even the best circumstances can't save a person. The Yuba County Five's ordeal echoes themes seen in other mysterious survival cases, such as the Dyatlov Pass incident. Both stories involve young, physically capable individuals facing extreme cold, making decisions that seem irrational in hindsight, and ultimately succumbing to forces beyond their control. These parallels invite a deeper exploration of what fear and psychological trauma can do to people in life-or-death situations. They challenge the idea that survival is purely a matter of physical strength or knowledge. Instead, survival is a complex dance between body and mind, where mental resilience can mean the difference between life and death. The stories of these men serve as painful reminders of how easily that balance can tip. Over the years, numerous theories have been proposed to explain what happened to the Yuba County Five, ranging from environmental hazards like sudden storms or wild animal attacks, to more speculative ideas like secret government involvement or mass hysteria. None of these theories fully account for the inconsistencies and gaps in the evidence. The truth may lie in a combination of factors: the harsh environment, physical injuries, psychological collapse, and sheer misfortune. Despite decades of investigation, the case remains officially unsolved. Its legacy lives on in the minds of those who seek to understand the human capacity for survival and the mysteries of the wilderness. The Yuba County Five story continues to captivate the public because it touches on universal fears: fear of the unknown, of being lost and alone, of the mind turning against itself when faced with impossible odds. It also serves as a somber lesson about the limits of human endurance and the unpredictability of nature. In a world where technology and knowledge often give us a false sense of control, these cases remind us of our vulnerability and the respect owed to the wild places we explore. For families, friends, and communities, the tragedy is a source of ongoing grief and unanswered questions. For scientists and survival experts, it is a case study in the intersection of physical and psychological survival. And for those who hear their story, it is a powerful, haunting reminder that sometimes, even the brightest flames can be extinguished by shadows that no one fully understands. The aftermath of the Yuba County Five tragedy left a profound mark on the small community where these young men had lived and on the wider public who followed the mysterious case. The unanswered questions sparked fear, fascination, and deep sorrow, especially for the families who faced the impossible task of mourning without clear closure. Each family held tightly to the hope that the missing men might be found alive during the early days of the search. But as time passed and the chilling details emerged, hope gave way to heartbreak and confusion. The sheer strangeness of how these men perished, without evidence of violence, yet far from help and safety, only intensified the anguish. The community itself was shaken to its core. Yuba County was a place where neighbors knew each other, where the mountains and forests were part of daily life. The disappearance of 5 promising young men in such inexplicable circumstances brought an eerie silence over the area. Friends and relatives struggled to comprehend how a night that began like any other ended in such devastation. They clung to memories of the men's laughter, plans, and youthful dreams. In many ways, the tragedy turned into a collective wound, one that would never fully heal. Investigators faced an uphill battle, contending with limited evidence and the harshness of the terrain. The case challenged conventional forensic approaches because there was no crime scene in the traditional sense, only a puzzle made up of scattered belongings, skeletal remains, and inexplicable behaviors. The search for answers extended beyond official channels. Amateur sleuths, journalists, and enthusiasts pored over the details, proposing theories ranging from natural disasters and accidents to conspiracy and supernatural involvement. Each theory reflected a desire to make sense of something that defied easy explanation. Among these theories, some suggested that the men might have suffered a sudden, inexplicable mental breakdown triggered by environmental conditions or an unknown external factor. Others speculated about possible encounters with wildlife or hostile individuals, though no evidence ever supported such claims. One of the more haunting possibilities was that the men experienced a shared psychosis, a rare condition where individuals influence each other's perceptions and actions in ways that spiral into collective irrational behavior. This could explain the bizarre decisions, such as leaving the car without adequate clothing and the scattered search for shelter. Yet, despite these theories, the human element remained central. The tragedy of the Yuba County Five is a reminder that survival is not only a physical challenge but also an emotional and psychological battle. Fear, confusion, and hopelessness can be just as deadly as the cold or hunger. In the years since the tragedy, the wilderness areas where the men disappeared have become places of quiet remembrance and reflection. Hikers and visitors often feel a somber weight when passing through, sensing the lingering mystery and respect owed to those who perished. The case has also influenced how survival training and emergency response consider the mental health of individuals in crisis. It highlights the importance of psychological resilience, group cohesion, and leadership in dire situations, elements that can mean the difference between life and death. Moreover, the story serves as a powerful lesson about the unpredictability of nature and the limits of human control. No amount of preparation or knowledge can guarantee safety when the mind begins to unravel and the body weakens under relentless conditions. For many, the Yuba County Five are more than just a cold case. They are symbols of youthful potential lost to the unforgiving wilderness, of the fragile boundary between life and death, and of the profound mysteries that nature can hide. Their legacy endures in books, documentaries, podcasts, and discussions that continue to keep their memory alive. Each retelling seeks to honor their lives and struggles while grappling with the enigma of their final hours. Ultimately, the story of the Yuba County Five is a sobering meditation on fear and survival. It asks us to consider not only the dangers that lurk in the wild but also the vulnerabilities within ourselves, the fears that can drive us to desperate acts, the mental battles that can break even the strongest among us. It is a tale that challenges us to confront our deepest anxieties about being lost, alone, and helpless in an indifferent world. And in that confrontation, we find a strange kinship with those who vanished, a shared human experience of facing the unknown. In the quiet hours after the discovery of the Yuba County Five's remains, questions multiplied, and the sense of unease grew heavier. The stark contrast between the men's potential and the tragic end they met sparked debates among experts and amateurs alike, each trying to piece together the fragments of an impossible puzzle. One of the enduring mysteries lies in the nature of the men's final moments. Why did they choose to abandon the safety of their vehicle, a place that, despite being cold and isolated, offered shelter and supplies? This decision remains baffling because the car was intact and equipped with blankets, food, and warmth. Yet, they left, some in inadequate clothing, and walked into the cold darkness. The answer may lie partly in the psychological effects of prolonged exposure to fear and isolation. As hypothermia sets in, people often experience confusion, irrationality, and even hallucinations. It is possible that the men, trapped in an unforgiving landscape with dwindling resources and no immediate hope for rescue, suffered a collective mental breakdown. This type of psychological deterioration is sometimes called paradoxical undressing, where hypothermic individuals feel an intense heat and remove their clothes, speeding their decline. But the Yuba County Five's behavior went beyond this. Their movements suggest a growing panic, a disorientation that fragmented their group and scattered them across miles of rough terrain. The environment itself can play a cruel role. The Sierra Nevada mountains, while beautiful, are merciless and unpredictable. Sudden weather changes, steep slopes, and dense forests can quickly turn a hike into a nightmare. Even experienced outdoorsmen can lose their way or fall victim to accidents. Yet, the men were not novices. They were university students and college graduates, familiar with the area and with basic survival knowledge. Their decision to drive out that night was not reckless, but something went terribly wrong after their car became stuck on a remote mountain road. Compounding the tragedy is the detail that one of the men, Jerry, managed to reach an old ranger cabin. Inside, he found food and shelter, but despite these resources, he did not survive. This fact underscores the importance of the mind's role in survival. Physical needs alone cannot sustain life without the will and mental strength to endure. The condition of the other bodies, scattered and distant from the car, paints a portrait of disorganized escape. They appeared to seek help or safety in multiple directions, perhaps driven by confusion, pain, or a fading hope of rescue. Medical examinations revealed injuries consistent with falls and blunt trauma, but none severe enough to be immediately fatal. There were no signs of struggle or attack. It was as if nature itself had become the silent killer, slowly eroding their chances. Investigators and forensic experts faced an unusual challenge: how to interpret a scene where conventional explanations failed. The case stretched the limits of forensic science and psychology, prompting interdisciplinary approaches. Some experts suggested that in extreme stress situations, groups can fracture psychologically, leading individuals to act against the group's best interests. The breakdown of communication and leadership can turn survival into chaos. The Yuba County Five case also triggered discussions about the human instinct for survival under stress. When faced with prolonged danger, the mind sometimes overrides logical decision-making with primitive responses: fight, flight, or freeze, and this can lead to decisions that, from the outside, seem inexplicable. Another theory considered environmental hazards such as toxic gases or sudden weather phenomena. Some posited the possibility of carbon monoxide poisoning or exposure to poisonous plants or animals, but no concrete evidence supported these ideas. While speculation flourished, the truth remains elusive. What is clear is that this tragedy reflects the vulnerability of human beings, even in their prime and with resources at hand, when confronted with overwhelming stress and isolation. The legacy of the Yuba County Five is both a warning and a lesson. It highlights the necessity of preparedness, of mental resilience, and of understanding how quickly a normal situation can spiral into chaos under the right conditions. More than that, it calls us to acknowledge the limits of human control and the unpredictable power of the natural world. No matter how skilled or brave, humans are still fragile creatures facing vast, often indifferent forces. This case also invites reflection on the role of community and memory. The families and friends of the men continue to search for meaning and peace, grappling with loss compounded by mystery. Their story has inspired books, films, and documentaries, keeping the men's memories alive while reminding us all of the thin line between life and death in the wilderness. The haunting nature of the Yuba County Five case ensures it will remain part of America's collective consciousness, a tragic testament to fear, survival, and the unknown forces that can claim lives without explanation. One of the most haunting aspects of the Yuba County Five case is the way it exposes the fragile boundary between hope and despair. When the search began, it was fueled by optimism. 5 young men, though missing, might still be alive, able to find their way back to safety. But as days turned into weeks, that hope faded, replaced by a creeping dread that the wilderness had claimed them. The discovery of the car, abandoned and stuck on a remote mountain road, was the first chilling clue that something was seriously wrong. It was as if the men had fled from something, whether fear, confusion, or a perceived threat, and left behind their only means of escape. The car, found with the keys still in the ignition and personal belongings scattered inside, painted a picture of sudden departure. There was no indication of a mechanical failure or accident severe enough to force them into the unforgiving night. The logical questions echoed: why leave the safety of a warm vehicle for the brutal cold? What unseen force compelled them to venture into the wilderness ill-prepared? One possibility is that the men were caught in the grip of a primal fear, an overwhelming sensation that compelled them to abandon reason and act on instinct alone. In survival psychology, this phenomenon is well documented. Under extreme stress, the mind may perceive danger where there is none, triggering a fight-or-flight response that overrides rational thought. In such a state, even familiar surroundings can become alien and threatening. What once was a safe refuge, the car, could suddenly feel like a trap. The decision to leave, although fatal in hindsight, may have seemed like the only option to escape an invisible threat. The scattered nature of the men's remains reinforces this theory. They did not move as a group but became separated, each struggling in isolation against the elements. This disintegration of the group dynamic is common in high-stress survival situations, where fear fractures trust and shared purpose. Another haunting detail lies in the death of Jerry, the youngest of the group, who reached the ranger cabin. Despite finding shelter and food, he did not survive. This fact suggests that survival is not merely about physical resources but also mental and emotional resilience. Without the will to endure, even the best shelter is powerless. Experts have explored whether hypothermia played a role in their erratic behavior. Hypothermia can cause confusion, impaired judgment, and hallucinations, leading victims to make dangerous choices, like removing their clothing or wandering away from safety. These symptoms could explain why some of the men were found with little clothing, exposed to deadly cold. Yet, hypothermia alone cannot account for the strange and seemingly deliberate actions observed. The group's movements, the choice to split up, and the long distances they traveled suggest a complex interplay of fear, confusion, and desperation. Environmental factors must also be considered. The Sierra Nevada mountains are notorious for unpredictable weather and treacherous terrain. Sudden storms, deep snow, and freezing temperatures create a hostile landscape that can disorient even experienced outdoorsmen. While the men were familiar with the area, familiarity offers no guarantee against nature's wrath. The harshness of winter can quickly turn a simple misstep into a life-threatening situation. Slips, falls, and exhaustion all contribute to the peril. Another theory speculated by some is the possibility of an unseen natural hazard, such as carbon monoxide poisoning from the car's exhaust or exposure to toxic gases in the canyon. Though these ideas lack direct evidence, they highlight how many unknown variables might have influenced the tragedy. The absence of any sign of violence or struggle is particularly unsettling. It eliminates theories involving foul play, leaving a void filled only by speculation about psychological collapse or environmental forces. The case also raises questions about human nature in crisis. When stripped of civilization's protections, people confront their primal instincts. Fear, isolation, and the instinct to survive can drive behaviors that defy logic and common sense. The Yuba County Five tragedy is a stark reminder of how thin the veneer of control can be. In an instant, the familiar can become alien, safety can turn to danger, and survival can depend on mental strength as much as physical endurance. Their story resonates because it touches on universal fears: the fear of being lost, the fear of isolation, and the fear of the unknown. It is a story of courage and vulnerability, of life cut short by forces both natural and psychological. The unanswered questions surrounding the case ensure it remains a subject of fascination and study. It challenges experts to deepen their understanding of survival psychology, forensic science, and the unpredictable relationship between humans and the wilderness. Beyond the mystery lies a profound human tragedy, a reminder that even in modern times, the wild holds dangers that can overwhelm, that the mind can betray, and that sometimes, even the strongest cannot fight the cold silence of the mountains. The tragic fate of the Yuba County Five lingers in the minds of those who ponder the fragile line between life and death, between reason and madness. As the cold Sierra Nevada mountains reclaimed the bodies of these young men, a haunting silence settled over their story, a silence that refuses to be broken by any definitive explanation. When all was said and done, the search for answers revealed only fragments, shards of a terrible night that no one survived to explain. The physical evidence, the frozen bodies, the scattered belongings, the footprints fading into snow, told a story of confusion, desperation, and fear. But the deeper truth, the emotional and psychological reality of what the men faced, remains lost in the icy wilderness. Their story echoes the mystery of another tragic event, thousands of miles away and decades earlier, the Dyatlov Pass incident in Russia. Like the Yuba County Five, 9 experienced hikers died under strange and disturbing circumstances. Their tent was found torn open from the inside, and their bodies scattered over a snowy slope, some suffering injuries too bizarre to explain by conventional means. Both tragedies share eerie parallels: groups of young men caught in unforgiving winter wilderness, acting in ways that confound logic, succumbing not to violence or external attack, but to something more intangible and chilling. Fear, confusion, the overwhelming power of nature, and perhaps something deeper, a primal human response to unimaginable stress. Experts who study survival psychology understand that when humans face extreme threats, the brain can spiral into chaos. The fight-or-flight response becomes distorted, people act irrationally, sometimes against their own best interests. Group cohesion breaks down. The cold numbs not just the body but the mind, creating hallucinations, delusions, and disorientation. In the case of the Yuba County Five, these psychological effects likely intertwined with the brutal physical challenges, hypothermia, exhaustion, injury, to seal their fate. One can imagine the terror as they wandered, isolated and lost, trying desperately to find warmth, shelter, or rescue, yet only sinking deeper into the wilderness and their own confusion. The presence of the ranger cabin offered a glimmer of hope, but Jerry's death inside, despite access to food and shelter, is a stark reminder that survival is never guaranteed by material means alone. Mental resilience, hope, and clarity are just as vital, and in extreme conditions, just as fragile. The families left behind carry the heaviest burden, forced to live with unanswered questions and an incomplete story. Their grief is compounded by the unknown. What truly happened that night? What thoughts ran through their minds? What fears drove them into the snow and away from safety? The Yuba County Five remain a cautionary tale about the limits of human endurance and the unpredictable cruelty of the natural world. They embody the vulnerability that even the strongest and most capable can face when isolated and overwhelmed. Their tragedy compels us to respect the wilderness, to prepare thoroughly, and to understand the subtle but profound effects of fear and isolation. It teaches that survival is a fragile balance between physical readiness and psychological strength. In the end, the story of the Yuba County Five is more than a mystery or a cold case. It is a profound reflection on mortality, on the power of nature, and on the human spirit's struggle to endure when all seems lost. As we look back on their final journey, we see not just victims of an unfathomable night, but a mirror held up to our own fears, the fear of being alone, the fear of losing control, and the fear that sometimes, no matter how hard we try, the wilderness will claim us all. The truth behind their disappearance may never be fully known, but their story continues to resonate. It reminds us that some mysteries are woven not just from facts and evidence, but from the raw, unpredictable complexities of human nature and the environment. This is the legacy of the Yuba County Five, a haunting, powerful reminder of life's fragility and the shadowed boundary between hope and despair. Thank you for joining me on this journey into one of America's most haunting mysteries, the tragic and puzzling story of the Yuba County Five. Their fate remains a chilling reminder of how fragile life can be when faced with the relentless power of nature and the shadows of the unknown. If this story moved you, made you think, or sent a shiver down your spine, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps bring more deep dives into unsolved mysteries and forgotten truths. Let me know in the comments what you think really happened that night in the Sierra Nevada. Do you believe it was nature's cruelty, psychological breakdown, or something more? I'd love to hear your theories. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and remember, sometimes, the darkest mysteries are the ones closest to home. This is Mr. Darsnights, signing off.